Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much. I have so much gratitude for all of you who continue to share Tracy and mine's passion for working with kids. And I love that OTs are so adaptable that we're going to find a way. We're going to find a way to keep treating our kids, even though I don't know if anyone on the chat today is seeing any children in person, but we're not able to. Based on where we're at. I think it just depends on the restrictions of your country, your region. And it looks like we might be in this for quite a bit longer. At least with living life with a little bit more restriction, but that only makes us more creative and more adaptable. So I'm just like really honored to call myself an OT and to be able to do this work and share my passion. And I'm just like, when I click on and see that so many of you are interested in doing what I find really rewarding and I think is really important in life, it feels really good. So anyway, thank you all for attending. I'm always a little bit on the emotional side, but I'm gonna just see here for a minute. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. And see, we'll get started. I just wanted to let you know that we've been getting quite a few emails for the past really month about this topic. And so a lot of what we prepared was based on those questions. And then we did put out a call for more questions with the registration for the webinar. And so we've incorporated those in. So throughout the entire body of this talk, I really am answering questions that we have gotten and what we think people might need more depth of understanding in to be able to proceed to use therapeutic listening and some of the sound tools that come from the Therapeutic Listening Library to be able to support kids now in this new way of us seeing kids remotely or virtually. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. So therapeutic listening, I think that some people think about therapeutic listening, at least when people come to the world of therapeutic listening, they're often coming because kids are overreactive sensorially, and one of the issues is that they're overreactive to sounds and they're struggling with the sound environment. But what we found over the last 20, 25 years is that sound really can help us with so many of the issues that we see in the kids that we're seeing. So arousal regulation and the ability to, once your arousal has risen to a point where it's no longer supporting what you need to do in life, to be able to bring that back down. We call that recovery. One of the biggest outcomes that we have seen of all of the therapeutic listening libraries is social engagement improves. And then many times using both the library of quick shifts, which we'll talk briefly about, and the modulated music, we have seen eating and sleeping challenges changing. And that's been something that seems to be cropping back up with many of the clients that I know we're seeing or we're supporting you with, is that in this new age, when families are under pressure economically, some families are under pressure just to meet their basic needs, that there's a lot of anxiety in the family. What we know is that state is very catchy. And if mom and dad are under pressure, then the whole family is feeling that stress. And so we are seeing more and more kids with sleeping issues when they might not have had them previously, but might be more predisposed to it. Our ability to, we're finding that the quick shifts in particular are fabulous for reducing anxiety, but we also have seen evidence of that in some of the modulated music. We know that the heavy rhythms in all of the therapeutic listening libraries, both the modulated music and the quick shifts, improve posture, bilateral motor coordination, and praxis. Those are all things we found. So literally, for me, this encompasses all of your goals. And you might say, well, no, my goal is handwriting. Well, if your goal is handwriting, my guess is postural and motor organization is an issue underneath it. Or if your goal is better behavior, my guess is that arousal regulation and sensory engagement, social engagement, are issues underneath it. So one of the things that we're going to talk about here is really looking at what is going on functionally with your kids. What are the functional concerns right now? But then breaking down what are these sensory integrative issues underneath it, and then matching music to that. That's how we apply therapeutic listening, and it is the one thing that differentiates it from all other listening protocols, is that we really start with occupation and function, and then as occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, physical therapists, then we look at the underlying issues and try to address those to meet the functional concerns. So that's basically an overview of how to think about things. So assessment becomes a bit, problematic, because using a standardized assessment, if you're doing telehealth, if it's a new client, isn't possible. But if it is a client that you've seen before, you may have standardized assessments on them. One of the things that we rely on in all of our clients, both new and ongoing treatment, is parent interview. And in the beginning, when it's a new client, we do that in a more in-depth style, where we have parents walk us through their life and then come to the places where there are problems. So I might just say to a parent, walk us through a typical day and what's it like? And then they say, oh, the morning. And in the morning, oh my gosh, it is just like a nightmare for him to get dressed. He's all over the place and I can't get his focus and attention. So then that becomes the function and the goal. But I'm going to say to myself, now what's underneath this? So what do I have to support what's underneath that? We have something that we use in therapeutic listening called the functional listening questionnaire that looks at the sensory components and how they impact function and how that impacts family life, which is critical right now. This is what we're looking at right now. All of our children's occupations are function in the home, in the family, for the most part, unless some of you are still working with special schools where kids are still going to school. That may be possible. I think that's still going on in some parts of the world. But right now, this functional listening questionnaire is really, really helpful. Those of you that have taken therapeutic listening in the last, I don't know, Tracy, you might pop in with the numbers, but at least the last 5 years, I think at least the last 10, we've been using the functional listening questionnaire. And I can't tell you how critical that is to really pay attention to. The functional component. It leads me into questions that came about documentation. The documentation is in your function. Therapeutic listening is your tool to get there. It's just like you don't document, you might document that you used a trampoline, but you might say that you're doing, vestibular proprioceptive postural work, right? For the means of better fine motor, for the means of being able to sit better in your chair. So we're using the therapeutic listening for the means of, and so that is going to be what are the underneath pieces. So we've got the problems. This is sensory responsivity might be one of the problems. I'm using therapeutic listening along with my other skills that I have to treat sensory overreactivity to actually improve that, to improve this function. So that would be the documentation piece. Also, what we have been asked is, what about reimbursement? You're being reimbursed for your service, OT, PT, speech and language, psychology, and you're being reimbursed for your goals. We do not include therapeutic listening as durable medical equipment because then it would need to be approved by the FDA and go through very extensive clinical trials that would have a population that would be a control group, which is very difficult in the age of sensory processing to have a control group because you would need to have consistency. That may be something that will come in the next 10 years. I know that Tracy is working tirelessly on a beginning step, which is fidelity in therapeutic listening, and really outlining the approach a little more clearly so we can get to that. But right now, it is a strategy that you're going to use to meet one of your goals. So anyway, back to this assessment piece. You have the parent interview. Start there. Find out the functional issues, because you're not only going to start there, and those are going to be your goals, right? What's the problem in life? Then you're going to do clinical observations. You're going to look at, particularly one of the things that we here at Vital Links talk a lot about is posture and movement. And you're going to evaluate anti-gravity postures, balance, bilateral motor coordination. How are you going to do that? Well, you might have to do that just by basic observation. You might have to lay on the floor and show the child with your camera, can you hold up like Superman? And it might not be standardized, it won't be, and can you roll on your belly and hold yourself up in a ball? Maybe you can't do that, so I might just set up a situation where the child rolls across the floor. It's going to be something that really tells me a lot about how organized their movement is. You might set up balance challenges in the home and just look at his or her balance. You may be able to ask them to stand on one foot. You might be able to take your clinical observations, videotape you doing them, send that to the parent ahead of time, and then ask the parent to support you in a meeting. So there's all kinds of ways that you are doing that. Somebody said, am I asking for log rolling? I want to, when I want to observe rolling with kids, to begin with, what I want to do is ask them to roll across the floor. I want to see what they're doing naturally. Are they righting their head? Is there rotation around the spine? Is it stiff? Do they not right? If they don't right their head, right there, you know they have vestibular proprioceptive, potentially ocular motor issues. You know, that I would then be thinking in music to add more rhythm. You want to set up a balance challenge, ask them to get parents to get something, phone books, a block, a couch cushion, ask them to stand on surfaces that are dynamic and see if they can do it. Can they hold their balance there? Ask them to stand on one foot, ask them to jump off of something and see how their body responds. If a child jumps off a surface, they should have some activity in their arms to provide balance, or do they just collapse on the floor? So you're kind of looking at their stability. Respiratory patterns may be a little bit more difficult, but you can tell how somebody is breathing through their vocal quality. So if the voice is up here or it's really breathy, that'll give you a clue about how well they're breathing. Also, how they hold their body will give you a clue. If I'm here, just do this with me. I don't even want to see that on the camera, what that looks like for me, but here, I'm exaggerating this. Here, hold in your belly, and now try to breathe. Whew. Even I did that, I got out of breath and felt like kind of like a little bit more anxious. So you're gonna have to really rely on your observations a little bit more to kind of let you know. And I think those observations are something that both Tracy and I use when we're in the clinic or when we're doing virtual sessions with kids. That's what we're looking at if we can't do something formal, to tell us postural, breath, eye, body, and space is going to give you a lot of information about vestibular visual function from a sensory integrative standpoint. You can go to doing tasks. How do they sit in the chair? That would just be, if they can't sit and control their pencil in writing and they're here and they're there, you already know that what is not working underneath is postural stability. And if you're resting your head, I'm going to tell you that the postural stability, not just in the core trunk, but in the neck, and is going to be related to the eyes, because we know that from neurology. We know that because within the nervous system, we have vestibular ocular cervical reflexes. And when I'm doing this, they can't even be activated. And now my vestibular system and my visual system and my cervical system are all sending a different signal. So they can't work in an integrated manner. So you're going to have to make some suppositions. And right now, yes, we need to be science-based and we need to have assessment. But right now, we're in this really unique period in history where we have this virtual way of serving people. And so we're going to have to get more creative at this point in time. And I feel like we see this already, that insurers, our own organization, are relaxing the rules and the standards a little bit so that we can serve people. Which brings me to another point. Just make sure you know the standards for telehealth in your area in terms of if you're working in a clinic that gets reimbursement, check all of that out, and in your state, and see where the rules are at. And they are changing on a daily basis to meet the needs of the people that we serve. So you may have to get more creative. And I know that today was a particularly creative day for me. I have a lot of ideas for presenting more things to support you all because, I've been doing this for a really long time. So it's easy for me to flip it around. It's 40 some years in. When you're brand new, yeah, it's challenging. So hopefully we're here, and what Tracy and I really want to do is support you all to do a great job. And we also want to continue to see our kids because that's what drives us. So hopefully that was helpful for people to give you an idea. So when you're selecting music, you really want to consider the functional concerns, looking at the functional listening questionnaire, that caregiver interview, and then the underlying sensory integrative difficulties. And I've already kind of talked quite a bit about that. In terms of clinical reasoning for auditory contributions, you have to think about many different things. So one is that you're going to think about responsiveness. So in just a second here, Tracy, I might need just a little, I'm going to see if I can do this. Okay. I had to change something on my screen so I could actually see the slide, but I'm all good. So in terms of looking at function, then you want to look at what could potentially be some of these sound issues underneath. So you want to look at responsiveness. The functional listening questionnaire is looking at that. So what are the qualities? It's going to give you all other sensation, but here when we're going to choose a sound tool, what are the qualities of sound? Are we going to choose something what are the qualities of the sound that is bothering somebody? So is it a low frequency sound? Like fire alarms, vacuum cleaners, public toilets flushing. Well, we don't do that much anymore, but it could be the toilet in the bathroom, the vacuum cleaner, babies crying, dogs barking. Those are all in that lower kind of what's in space range. And you also want to consider, somebody asked a question about misophonia, those body-based sounds. Like we've had children who couldn't stand and adults to be with people, couldn't stand their breathing, can't stand chewing, can't stand slurping sounds, where that just really makes them like kind of angry, more of a misophonia, if you will. And I'll address that misophonic question later. But my question to the person who asked it would be, what are the qualities of the sound that are bothering this person? And you can come back and don't type that in the chat box now. Do that for me later. I'll ask you when we get to that question in the presentation. But just looking at the qualities of sound, and then neurodevelopmental responsiveness. There are some time periods for children, like basically in toddlerhood, where dogs barking and some other things are frightening. But you also, it's not just, is it frightening? Do they cover their ears? What is their body response? How much does it impact them? Do they get so stiff, so upset, they can't breathe, they can't function, they can't move past it? And then afterwards, can they recover from that? Those are the things you want to know. They're also the things that you document in your documentation. That you have a child who is when there is a dog barking, he can't go outside, and now he won't go outside at all to play in the yard because the dog might be out there. Now that's a child that doesn't recover, and that's step one of where you started, and then you start to treat that child. I would probably be treating them with a regulation 2 quick shift, or if I was in modulated, a links to space to start, and then the next week when you check in, oh, now he's willing to go outside, but he runs in when the dog barks. Well, that's progress. Okay, that is a different level of responsiveness. And then in the next week you see him, now he can stay out there a little longer. And maybe you have some other strategies while he's outside, just to give you an idea. So that ability to recover and affect regulation, that's what you want to track, because that's what's going to tell you if you're on the right path. When we're working with kids and adults who've had issues with call it audition, the non-language processing of sound, it's a perceptual and a misperception. So you need to keep shifting the perception and staying in function in the environment where that misperception happened, so that you can integrate the new response. So that is going to be a glimmer of something changing and then keeping something in over time. So looking at the quality of responsiveness. We also want you to look at spatial quality. So that was another question that came up that we'll answer again more directly. Is there a low frequency sound sensitivity, particularly low frequency sounds? Is there hesitancy in movement, a gravitational insecurity that has very much a backward component, or moving into space that you can't see? That really is the clue that it's an auditory component that goes along with the gravitational insecurity that we call a spatial insecurity. It's kind of gravitational / spatial, because there may also be vestibular issues with that child. But if you address the space first, you create comfort and safety in the environment, then it's easier to address the vestibular proprioceptive component of that. Also, what we see when kids don't sense space or have a good perception of the spatial surround, the space that surrounds them, is they get super controlling. They have to control every single aspect of the environment, because space allows you prediction. Okay, space, the spatial surround is one component of, or one dimension of time and space that allows you to predict what's going to happen. So if you can't predict what's going to happen, then you need to be in charge. And so that's a really key clue that you might need to use something spatial in your music. So if you're in quick shifts, a regulation 2 quick shift. If you're in modulated music, links to space, nature pop. Oh, if you're in quick shifts, you might use a space quick shift. So those are things that lead me to that decision making. And so we're doing this detective work underneath the functional problems. That's really the key. That's the essence of clinical reasoning. It's why people need us to support them in their lives, because they might be able to do a couple of practical things like, well, I just will go play in a different yard or something, but that's an adaptation. That doesn't shift the real cause of the problem. So then we want to know how much of this problem is a zoom in and zoom out, because it's this focusing element and the qualities of difficulty in focusing that tell us that we really need modulated music, and that we really need to put that in there, which is what we teach in the therapeutic listening course that's coming up this weekend, is that ability to zoom in and zoom out in complex environments. And so we see classrooms, public spaces we're not going in now, but that would also be, you know, you're at home and you have a family with 2 kids or 3 kids or 4 kids and a mom and a dad, and maybe now somebody from, you know, they live in a duplex with the grandma, and so they've been able to see each other. So there could be more people in a space, and the child can't follow directions once the space gets too noisy. They can't hear mom calling. They can't, well, they can hear it, they just can't tune into it. And so they just keep playing as if it never happened. Multiple ear infections is also an indication, and they don't, if they happen 1 or 2, even in that really early period of the first year of life, can have a big impact. So the earlier, when you have a couple in the first year of life, is when you're really adapting the zoom in, zoom out, and getting it sort of tuned, like you think of like tuning a piano keyboard. So that really speaks to, oh, I've got to have modulated music in here somewhere in this program. I might be starting with quick shifts for a while, but I got to get to that modulated music piece. So that's sort of how, this is a way that Tracy and I clinically reason that we thought this slide would really help you with being able to clinically reason which library am I going to be in. So which library are you going to be in? Here is all of the choices, and some of you haven't been trained in any of it yet. Some of you have been trained in all of it, but this is what I'm clinically reasoning with. So basically let's see if I can get a pointer here. Maybe not, but I think you can see my little mouse. So basically we started therapeutic listening, it's gonna be over 20 years now, crazy, with modulated music. So you see that on the bottom. And then the next component that we developed was a tool called a gear shifter. For those of you that know quick shifts, it's a longer quick shift that actually moves you more slowly through the just right range with more finesse, if you will. I was trying to think there's another word for it, but it's not as, it's really there for kids who really struggle to stay in an optimal range, and they might get there with a quick shift, but they can't stay there. We started with those, and quick shifts evolved out of that. So gear shifter have been around early on, as has spatially enhanced, where we actually are taking the parts of the sound that would tell you about the spatial surround, your surrounding space, if you will, the ambient auditory environment, however you want to say that, and making it more 3D, helping you to tune into the spatial qualities of sound. So that's spatially enhanced, and fine tuning is really much more about academic performance. So you may be working with kids who are really struggling now to do their online schoolwork, and they're at a higher level. So fine tuning would be the appropriate choice there. This is just a background to show you all of the music available. You know, we've been doing this for a long time, and we still get emails from people who were trained 13 years ago, and they don't understand the new music. So if you're one of those people, I'm not going to go into this all now, but here is a real depth and breadth to the music. Some people who have had training early on will come back and retake a course, and we do, just if you are one of those people who are interested, we do offer a very reduced price for you to retake it, just to catch up on everything that's new. And the new way of thinking, which is really not brand new, it's just an evolution of what we started for those of you that were with us 20 years ago. So you'll see the progression and the evolution of more delineation and more detail in some of the ideas that were around since the beginning of therapeutic listening. If you're doing modulated music, you really want that to be 30 minutes each session, 2 times a day, with a minimum separation of 3 hours. Listening time in between. You know that that music uses that high alternating high-low pass filter, which helps you zoom in and zoom out. This is going to require that you have the appropriate headphones. Right now we have 2 appropriate headphones, the Sounds headphones, which are the least expensive ones, the Sennheisers. Those are currently out in some places. Sennheiser has decided to discontinue making headphones for therapeutic listening. That's been something that was in the works for the last 3 years, and they have not been able to come up with an appropriate headphone that had the same characteristics without it being more expensive, so we didn't continue with them. However, Vital Sound still has a fair number of the Sennheisers in stock, but we moved to, since we had a heads up on that, creating a headphone that was durable, that didn't have distortions and peaks. That's a really critical feature that I think people aren't aware of. You can have a high quality headphone that actually has a distortion or a peak in a range that we don't want it. That's a distortion that really will add to some of the misperception that kids are having. And all of our headphones have been vetted and adjusted, and that was true for the original Sennheisers as well. Interestingly enough, they were looked at by sound engineer from the with the purposes of therapeutic listening in mind, and made sure they didn't have peaks in certain ranges where our kids have sensitivities. And the same thing was true for sounds. They were actually, the first batch that came out had an issue that we had to have them remade. So when you're getting a headphone from Vital Sound, you're getting one that we have vetted. When you're getting something else, you don't know exactly what you're getting, even though somebody might swear it's high quality. So you have to make your own decision. And in this day, that's on you and the parents to decide, given that information. It's not something that there's, other than having the information to make that decision appropriately. If you're using quick shifts, you do not need, it doesn't matter, because the reason why it doesn't matter is with the modulated music, we really want to get into the zoom in and zoom out feature, and we need to have clarity in the upper end of the sound spectrum above 1,000 hertz, and it needs to be clear and precise without distortions up to the headphone up to 20-some thousand hertz, and I'm going to not get that exact detail right now. But when you're, and because that zooming in, zooming out, and the qualities of sound are supporting that zooming in, zooming out, when you're doing a quick shift, it doesn't matter. So you can use any headphone that covers the ears. If you're using headphones, earbuds are a bad idea for all of us. I know I'm a little guilty of using my little AirPods when I'm out on a walk and I want to listen to a podcast, but they really aren't healthy for the ear. And if we're working with kids who have misperceptions of sound, we don't want to add to that. So that's a critically kind of important piece. If you're using modulated music, you want to change the album every 2 weeks. So hopefully that was helpful. Back to a question we get all the time. If you're trialing modulated music on telehealth, the family needs to have headphones and they need to have the music on the app, and we'll talk about that later, on the phone, or they will have needed to get from you or another source a Sansa clip player and a Sansa chip if you're doing that version of listening, or maybe a CD, and maybe you're sending things in the mail from your lending library. The easiest thing to do would be to download from the app, but that may be an issue of finance for some people. So that's what that will make modulated music for some families may be prohibitive, but you'll have to make your decision based on the needs of the client. So in the next version, and I'm just going to take a breath for a minute, Tracy, and I don't know if you've had a chance there. I know I can't talk and kind of monitor the chat box, but to see if there were any questions that were about clarification for something that I've been talking about before I kind of move on, just to get a little feedback from the group.
Sure. Yes, Carol has a question regarding the wireless or Bluetooth headphones like Bose, which are over-the-ear headphones and potentially have a frequency range up to 24,000 hertz or 2,400, she's stating. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that, the wireless headphones.
Yeah, right now the wireless doesn't have the same quality for the modulated music, and we're not recommending them for the modulated music, but we can use them for the quick shifts. So that would be my recommendation, because we also know when we're using Bluetooth, we're picking up other things, and some of our kids that could be picked up over those speakers. So, and many of our kids are super sensitive, and that's what we're working with often when modulated music is part of the issue. So we don't recommend them. We also have all of the research and all of our results with keeping the headphone as constant when we're talking about modulated music. So that would be our other recommendation. I would again say, if you're going to do modulated, stick with the 2 approved headphones. Would be, if you're going to ask me, that's always going to be my answer, because we have a known, and otherwise you would have to have things tested for response range and peaks, which we can't do with every headphone. It would be overwhelming. So we recommend what we have had vetted and what we have results with.
So I don't know if you want to move into answering this question when we get a little bit later, I know
Okay.
this kind of relates to some of the questions we had prepared for people, but Elizabeth is asking if we have tips for selecting the right choice of modulated music over telehealth when parents are using the app.
Okay. I did kind of prepare like a whole, and if it's modulated, let's talk about it now since we're in this section. So here's the thing, I sat this morning, I was up early and was really thinking about, like the practicality of this and trying to think of things that I sometimes think, I know I sometimes go right to it and lose the big picture when I'm talking to stuff and do things intuitively and don't talk about them. So let's pretend that, boom, I'm on with you right now, and let's say that you're a known client to me, and you've been in the clinic, and I've used some quick shifts, and I've used one modulated album, and now I have to continue modulated, and so I know you. And so I might do something with the child like, hey, how you doing? Check in, get comfy with the child, get their attention, and maybe have them do something like take me around their house and show me their favorite toys and talk to me about things that they, if they can, have been doing and that they like to do, and then maybe look through with them, if mom's okay with you taking them through the house, their toy cupboard or whatever, their art cupboard, their art supplies, maybe their playroom if they have one, maybe they don't, maybe it's just the living room and what's available to play a game with that would be appropriate with the headphones. And I would pick something the child loves and they will engage in. So you've had this opportunity in the first part to watch their movement, to gauge their arousal level. You've probably talked to mom and know what some of the functional concerns are. You've known them in the past, and now you might be, I did links to modulation with this child, and the issues are that he really can't sleep well through the night, and his arousal's all over the place and his movement's all over the place, and he's 4. Then I might be saying, oh, do I want to go to rhythm and rhyme? That's kind of where I would go, with movement all over the place because rhythm was underneath it. Or do I want to go to sleep, and is eating an issue, and going to the bathroom, that homeostatic function, Mozart for modulation. And maybe all of those things are true. And it's like, oh, which one am I going to use now? And I've got these 2 choices in mind. And as I watched him move, I'm making this up just to give you a clue, like what I would be thinking, is posturally, he was, kind of all over the place and really couldn't sit still and was kind of running around on his tippy toes while he was showing me his stuff, getting more and more excited. I think I'm going to go with rhythm and rhyme. So then I would have mom download it on the app. She could do the rental for $10. I would have her, then we pick our activity, and maybe mom is going to allow you to get the shaving cream out of the bathroom and do it on the kitchen table, because this would be novel and this would be exciting, and this is something you usually can't do at home. So now it has intrigue to it. And then I'd make sure mom had the towels handy and maybe one of dad's old shirts so we just can take care of the mess. And I might then also find some little people or some little figurines that you could play, and so you can expand the shaving cream play because you've got a good amount of time. And then I'd have mom say, okay, and while we do this, it's time to listen, and put the headphones on once she's downloaded. And then I'm going to watch. Have mom set up the camera where I can see his face. I can get a sense of what's going on posturally. And I would look for that sort of stopping, stilling. I would see if his face became more relaxed and potentially more animated. I'd be listening to his voice, and maybe he starts out playing in the shaving cream all wild like this, and then he starts to move slower. Those are the things I would look for to say I've had a match. That would give me confirmation to keep going. I'd probably keep going anyway. It's a decent choice if you didn't see any of those things, but that would be my observation. And then I would also give mom a clue about what to look for. Does he seem like he stays with things a little bit longer? Are some of these functional issues that we saw with him sleeping and eating and just activity level are just whatever? I might even have mom give it a number, like if 10 is the best that he would sit and stay at the table, where do you think he's at now? So that you can kind of quantify for when you see him next week. I don't know if you'd say anything differently, Tracy, around that. I'm just trying to get into my head and visualize experiences that I've had with kids and how I'm thinking to help people.
No, I think that was a beautiful example. And I think the biggest piece is that we, continue to want to watch our clients and observe their responses to a new piece of music, just like you would in a treatment session when you are actually able to be physically in person with them. But the feedback of parents is going to be particularly helpful. And so I might also recommend too, for ongoing documentation, to have the parents try to keep track as much as possible of things that they're noticing and seeing, as that will further allow you to be able to make good clinical reasoning choices with subsequent albums.
Okay, thank you. So I think if there's not another real pertinent question, we'll move on from here. So into the quick shifts, which many people have been finding super helpful, especially because one thing they really address nicely is regulation of arousal, which brings you into the green zone, which is how we mitigate anxiety. So, and the ones that would be particularly helpful for that could be all of them, quite truthfully. Just it's about finding the match for the client. And again, we go with function. I'd say, and I just wanted to say, because somebody asked me the question about misophonia, and that comes up on an earlier slide, but particularly I often think misophonia is, what we know about it is that there are some problems in the insula and part of the anterior cingulate cortex, which are, insula is going to give you interoception, your feelings, and that anterior cingulate is going to be involved in affective expression. So misophonia has a lot of emotionality with it. So in one, I would look at what is the sound. If it has a lot of an element that causes stiffness and startle in the body, or tension in the gut, which is part of the startle pattern, and the shoulders, and tension in the extremities that could be seen like this, or like this, or this, then I would use a regulation 2 quick shift to start. If it has some low frequency elements to it, I would probably use a space quick shift. And if those are working well, then I would go on with, are there other issues? What is the age of a client? I know that Tracy and I had a 65-year-old woman with misophonia, but she also had a history of low frequency sound sensitivity, very easily startled. Her breath was often taken away when she became anxious, and her, kind of holding on. So those are some of the choices. We did a regulation 2 quick shift, a regulation 1 quick shift to keep that up, a space quick shift. But then she went into like a gentle focus, like things to keep it going. So that's just a little bit of idea about misophonia, but I also might look in the other libraries, and it's like I can answer like the beginning question of that, but without the full functional listening questionnaire and an interview and looking at this person as a whole, going on further, I don't know. But those are kind of things we've used quite commonly in misophonia. So that just to give you an idea. But the quick shifts, the first box, if you want to just give it a general rule, is about regulation of this first circle. The second one is about movement. So this is where any of you who have already been working with a client with vestibular, postural, bilateral motor organization goals, in our clinical trials with the quick shifts, we saw balance improve, some of the anti-gravity postures improve, and bilateral motor coordination improve across the age spectrum. Pre and post listening to quick shift over was that a 12-week period, Tracy, in our last trial?
Yes, I do believe so.
You can find those results on our website. And so everything from this movement box is going to give you, those of you that were treating in an SI clinic with suspended equipment, we know that with rhythm in sound, the lower end of rhythm, that sounds up to 800 hertz are going to impact the saccula of the vestibular system. We also know that rhythm impacts the cerebellum. Vestibular system is tightly wound with the cerebellum. So all of your functions, vestibular, postural, ocular organization, bilateral motor control, are impacted by rhythm. So when you can't get into the clinic and when people can't get as much movement, you use the quick shifts from this section. And gravitational grip, bilateral motor coordination have been super helpful For younger kids, power waves, rock and surf, syncing up for teenage kids. Rhythmic raspberry has been powerful for anxiety with kids, which it's interesting because we do not see that in the same music with modulated. So raspberry jams has not been proven to reduce anxiety, but rhythmic raspberry does. It's about the different kind of filtering. Sentimental strawberry has also been super helpful with a lot of our older clients who are much more impacted by their autism. So if you have somebody, and you might be consulting with somebody that's very difficult to engage, maybe potentially self-harming, and people are very concerned, and now some of these families are trying to work with some of these individuals that really require a team and a lot of support at home, that may be an option as well. And then if you're supporting schoolwork, the gentle focus, the Mozart for ideation, fabulous. It's so funny. I just moved into a new place, just moved in, boom, and then all of this happened. And I was like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed. I got boxes everywhere and I can't organize the cupboards. And I was getting overwhelmed, and Tracy's daughter recommended, because I was overwhelmed. I love it. She's what, 10, Tracy? A regulation 2 quick shift. You love it when your kids are coming back at you. She said, Mom, why doesn't Sheila just listen to a quick shift? And I said, oh, Gwen, what quick shift? She said regulation 2. But anyway, but when I couldn't, was like, oh, I was overwhelmed by the boxes, I thought, okay, I'm just going to play Mozart for ideation, because for me, organization isn't my strong suit. Now I had to figure out how to put everything away in an organized way. And it really, all of a sudden, I'm just doing stuff, and was like, okay, the anxiety about did I have it right went away. And I just started to get ideas about how to organize. It was kind of fun. It's kind of fun when your own stuff works for you. So these are also tools that I think can be supportive across the board for other kids in your own family. It's, sound has been used. You see the whole music industry is now coming up to support us and putting on free concerts, because music has been therapeutic throughout time. So if you want an extra kick for arousal, bilateral motor coordination at a quick shift, otherwise play in your own music libraries, really. So just a little bit of background on choosing quick shifts if you don't know about them. We do have trainings on them, but they are also something that's freely available. So here are suggestions for how to pick a quick shift that you can look at later. Many of you have probably been trained in them, and that's why you've come on. So I'm not going to go over all of this unless there are questions related to it, because I want to take the time to get to some of your questions. There's just a little feedback about the Therapeutic Listening app. Just a question that came in this week was somebody had done a rental of modulated music, and then they tried to then they did another rental, and then they thought they would get both rentals off the price. You can only deduct one rental. So if you rent for 2 weeks and the parents decide that that album is really helpful for, let's say that we had one young man where when he did, was it rhythm and rhyme, Tracy, that he started eating and he had a severe issue, severe aversion to food. He gagged, and mealtime was I forgot, an hour long or something, and Mom had to get food in him. But with rhythm and rhyme, he started to eat without the anxiety. And so parents then purchased that. They didn't keep using it after 2 weeks, but they rotated it back in once his treatment protocol, and he was doing well if he started to have a rough time. So then they purchase it and the rental price comes off. So that's kind of how that works. You still can get the Sansa chip jam player from Amazon. You also can get them all set up for you the way that they're meant to be set up from Vital Sounds, which is still open, because it's just right now it's down to one person who is in that office, so that it's still and it's mail order, so there's no contact with the public. So all of that can still come to families' doors if they have the means for that. So that's also still another possibility. I think I talked about some of this, what can be done while listening. Really anything. I would say though, if I'm doing listening and I really am focusing on the listening and that's my goal, what I'm really going to make sure that I have is an activity that super engages the child. And many kids, once the headphones go on, enjoy fine motor play. In our clinic, these are the things that are go-to. A bubble tub, so, or all of the toys that you can blow bubbles with. We have a giant bin of them, and you know, they're really all the same thing, but they're different animals and whatever. And you rummage through the bin and you blow bubbles and you play bubble games, and you might blow, one of my favorite games is you take the bubble trumpet. You might have to do that to entertain a child and blow a big bubble, take a straw and get it coated in bubble material and put it in, blow little bubbles in there. And the bubbles are visually really just exciting. Cars, trains, train tracks, car mats are also something. If those things are novel, it's better. Or if mom had something in the basement, that's what I'd be going for, is the toys that got put away for a while. And art supplies, shaving cream, messy play, because you want to be somewhat stiller. Now, you might have to do movement, and kids, maybe now people don't have a doorway swing. If dad has a chin-up bar, you probably can put a chin-up bar in the doorway. You could create a swing out of that. But the other thing that you could create ahead of time is hideouts, and have the child create their own cave, their own hideaway, and they could go in there with the computer or the phone or whatever you're using to do telehealth and listen with you, and they take their favorite toys in there. Maybe they take art supplies in there. So set up an engaging thing ahead of time, or else you're gonna be a little bit sunk. Because, you know, this is what we have to do in the clinic, is think about what really engages. And now you have to think about that at home. I already talked about, you know, it's a match by watching the child's response, but also after a period of listening, has their voice changed? Has their activity level changed? And it may not be changed great big. I hope it is for all of you, because that's exciting. It might be, has it gone from they're super, super active, and this is the boom, 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 the range of which they're pinging between, when has it come into here or here? Is it slightly improved? Has movement slowed down? Has voice slowed down? Is there more interaction? Are they more interactive with the parent? Are they better following directions? Does their face look different? Which selections are more appropriate for vestibular proprioceptive? I would absolutely say, if that's what you're going after, I'd stick in that quick shift box. A circle of movement would be a great place if you're trying, because now you had a child that came in the clinic and he was all over the place, and you really could use intensity through vestibular proprioception, and you can't get the same level of intensity at home. That's where I would be adding those in. You can use alternate headphones for quick shifts, but they're not recommended for the modulated. I would highly recommend sticking with the correct ones. No, that's not what you want to hear, but it is going to be the thing that's going to keep your results the most consistent. And then how often do you change albums? If you're in modulated, it's going to be every 2 weeks. If you're in quick shifts, they can be used in a multitude of ways. They can be used to support sensory diet. But if you're using quick shifts to see if you can get a postural bilateral motor change and some kind of motor skill, I may keep one in for 2 weeks, listening 2 times a day like you do the modulated music, to see how much you can get out of it. And that's also going to be a way to keep cost and keep things affordable for people, because that's a big concern right now for all of us, with, you know, the uncertainty of when we're going to move back to work at its full scale. We talked about reimbursement and documentation. You're going to rely on function, and you're going to track function, but it's going to be your job as a therapist to really get underneath and really fine tune where's the issue and address that issue. And it's going to be in the functional changes that you know you have gotten there, or you're going to see those things changing, and you're going to know that those functional changes are coming. And that's the other thing. Sometimes I think we go in and we think we're going to put this in and we look for this to change, and these other things are changing, and some of the bottom building blocks, if you will, of sensory integrative, the things that lead to posture, you're being more posturally activated, your breath is more regulated, you can get your eyes on your hands a little bit better, you've slowed down a little bit. Those things take a little bit more time to summate to get to your functional change. So being aware of those subtle things and tracking them to see how they're going to impact function is going to be part of your documentation, that these are pieces underneath, they are changing. Right now, we haven't seen the translation to function, but this is, and part of it is, this is how it's connected, because he is posturally more active. And now I'm going to go into activities that take that further. What I'm working towards is him sitting longer at the dinner table, or longer in the classroom if it was school. In terms of, I think this one's interesting, how to terminate or wean from a therapeutic listening protocol. I don't think like that. I think, how long can therapeutic listening support someone? The libraries are vast. What we usually see with our kids is a progression of uphill, 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 functional change, functional change, functional change, functional change. When we hit the leveling off, we often take a break, and then we might use, one possibility is, and I've had that uphill, uphill, uphill over a year with many libraries, and then discharge, and then family calls and says, you know, so-and-so Sarah has done so well for so long, but a couple of those things that were happening before are coming back, they're not as bad. Then I would go look at Sarah's chart and see what are the best ones, the ones she responded the best to, and put them in an alternating pattern. So let's say that she responded really well to, remembering Sarah, Mozart for modulation. She was an older kid of Vivaldi, and she also did really well with a nature pop, and she did well with, I can't remember the others. So there was about 5 of them, and I put them in, listen to this first one in the morning, the second one in the afternoon, this one the next morning, this one in the afternoon. So you do a rotation through, and you often get, boom, another big pop in function. So I don't know, Tracy, if you want to say about that, but the ear needs, the modulated music tunes the ear, and your ear gets detuned. I think that now maybe we're living in a quieter world with less traffic, less planes. It's not great for our economy, but I'm noticing, all for Tracy and I've been noticing, all the wild animals are coming out of the woods. For us, where we live, it's like crazy, because I think the vibration isn't as intense, which I think is an interesting thing, but we live in a world that's too loud. We live in a world that has artificial sound that the ear wasn't tuned to. So you often have to keep coming back to that. I've been doing a class, because, you know, I'm aging. I know, yeah, I know I don't look like it. Well, anyway, I kind of do. But anyway, I really just don't care about that. I really want to stay strong. And so how long do I have to lift weights? I have to keep lifting weights, because we don't live in a world, we live in a world that's too soft. I don't lift on a regular basis in my daily life, especially now, not being in the clinic. So I need to do strength training to maintain my potential function. So you may need to go in and out of using the modulated music to retune the ear. It's what I do for myself. I go in and out of quick shifts. Sometimes, if I've used them a little bit more now, I used them a lot when they came out, but because my anxiety's up, it's all of ours is. I mean, it's just, we're living in a time of like a lot of unknown. And so our natural response is to get worried. So you know, there'll be a period of intensity that will level off, taking breaks, and then maybe going back to things that were useful, or potentially, as the child's gotten older, exploring other libraries. And so what approaches are used to treat misophonia? I think that I did talk about that, and is, you know, the earlier, but is there a listening profile? Well, somewhat. It often has that real emotionality to it, and you want to figure out, if it's an older person, do they have sensory responsivity issues that have shifted because they've learned how to eliminate things in their life? So that doesn't mean they really got better. They've just learned how to adapt by having a narrower range of function. I'm going to go back and find out more about their developmental picture. And are there other things underneath that that relate to that? So I think I answered that, but you would need to know more of the things that I asked earlier, of that, looking at the big picture. And then I love this question: what's the difference in how to clinically determine if it's an issue that's spatial or more vestibular? And I love that the person who asked this question went on to tell me about a child. So I'm going to see if I can remember that. So how do I know if it's more spatial? We did talk about that go back to that diagram and think about those questions. Or is it more vestibular ocular? So in this client, I'm not remembering the whole email, but I am remembering one of the things that you told me was that in this client, they had really good prone extension, but they didn't have very good supine flexion. and their eyes didn't work well together. So they really couldn't do the bilateral, I'm blanking on the word, but the two eyes come together, convergence. Thank you, and get their eyes on their hand. Well, to me, ocular motor always has a vestibular element. So a postural ocular would be part of that anti-gravity with the eyes. And I would ask the question is, was there an issue of backward space, and how controlling were they on top of that? Because you can have those things go together. But from your question, the person who asked that, it seemed more like a vestibular proprioceptive postural ocular issue to me, but I would look for those other qualities to see if you want to add something like a nature pop that would address both ends, if you thought both ends were the issue. So, oh, I think we made it through, but there's probably a few other questions.
Yep, there's some other questions, and I also wanted to pull up to augment that question. Let's see if I can switch over to my the functional listening questionnaire.
Oh, thank you, Tracy.
Because that has a really good section in it that we often go to when we're weighing out those difficulties between the auditory spatial component and what music to pick, or more of that vestibular proprioceptive component. So this would be another section to look at. This is towards the end of the functional listening questionnaire, page 12 of the functional listening questionnaire, which you all have access to in your materials for this webinar. But in this section, the question, does your child display any of the following movement difficulties? So we're particularly weighing out here activities where the response more indicates avoids or fears movement. So avoids activities where feet leave the ground, avoids fears activities requiring balance, resists having head tilted backwards. Those particular questions often correlate with an auditory spatial component, especially when they're coupled with this question demonstrating an irrational fear to any of the following noisy appliances, which are the low frequency sounds. Otherwise, if we see that a client responds to this question that's more vestibular proprioceptive in nature, when we see responses like stomps, slaps feet when walking, lethargic, inactive, leans on objects for stability. When we see question or responses like that to this question, we often start to think a little bit more of the vestibular proprioceptive piece. And sometimes it's both, right? And then as Sheila was talking about, the nature pop might be a really good choice in that case. There is the functional listening questionnaire for adults. I just saw that question come in. So that is available. Forgive me, I can't remember if we have it on our website. It should be available on the Vital Links website. If not, you can email us at info@vitallinks.net and we can help you find that. But there are more questions, Sheila, if you want to take a couple.
And I want to say one more thing that I was thinking, and I love that the therapist who asked that question gave me part of that, is that, so, okay, let's say that I have the spatial and a little bit of this drags feet, whatever, and I'm really trying to decide, look at prone extension, supine flexion, and get a gross idea about ocular tracking, saccadic eye movement, do a visual screen. Because if eyes are struggling and anti-gravity postural control is also an issue, and particularly looking at control at the head, neck, and shoulder girdle, then you've got a vestibular component as well. And so, and the therapist really was clued into that, but I wanted to share that because I love that question. It made my morning with everybody else to share that thinking, because that's going to really help clarify things for people.
Perfect.
So thank you for the question.
So Sarah is asking about activities for a teenager to be doing while they're doing the listening, and if it's appropriate to be able to read while they're doing their therapeutic listening.
Read would be, if I'd probably at this point in time be okay with it if reading wasn't a struggle and it was something they did for pleasure and they were good at it. I wouldn't enforce that they work on their reading while listening if it's a struggle. The other thing, I had written myself a note this morning, but I've write all over the place and lost it. For teenagers, look for gym equipment in the home. Like, could they watch on the treadmill? I would be, or could they set up a balance course to do? Could they work, could you think of something to do? Some homes have BOSUs and gym balls. And maybe you just do that at the end like after they've taken the headphones off and do 5 minutes of movement to kind of take it on through the body. I also am very fond of artwork, and it could just be a collage, and it could be a dream board for a teenager. Like, come up with something that has some structure. So I think a dream board would be a great idea for your teenagers to work on, dreaming of what they're going to do, when they get to go back to school, or where are they at in their life? What are they dreaming about in the next year? What do they want to have happen for them? What are they interested in? Is it they want to drive a car? Could they be cutting out cars and getting a bunch of, if people have it, old magazines in the house and a big piece of paper and, a glue stick and scissors could be, I don't know, I get off on that. I like the dream boards, but are other potential possibilities for kids that might not be really dexterous manually, but
We've also found, if it's possible, if there's someone else who's able to, like an adult or a sibling, Uno has been a particularly popular game with our teenage clients when we were in the clinic. So maybe revisiting some of those things that we often don't have time to do as a family during this time. That might be a good time to play some of those games while they're listening. So that's another potential option.
Teaching a teenager the old-fashioned solitaire that's not on the computer with cards could be a good one.
Yeah, that's a great one. Sheila, you had said a sentence which you may not remember at this point about perception, misperception, and moving to function. Do you remember what you said?
Well, I said that, so when we're treating kids, and if you want to call it auditory processing, AOTA uses that terminology, but differentiate it from what a speech and language pathologist or audiologist would do. And the way I differentiate that is audition, the non-language processing of sound. For what? Auditory perception. The problem with our kids is they're misperceiving the auditory world, and they can't get their bodies organized around it. And so you want to look at what elements of audition are underneath function. Sometimes the element of getting in the rhythmic synchrony of conversation is a child who rhythmically can't organize their body. And so maybe I'm going to choose rhythm and rhyme or at grape jams because they're in their progression, something rhythmical. And when I put that in, I see that now they can start getting the back and forth flow of conversation, and it's translating to better social skills, better listening. I don't know, that was just an idea. So like, I want to look at what is the misperception. They can't filter out background noise. And we see that in louder environments, their anxiety, that's how you're going to see it. Their anxiety goes up and they're more dysregulated. So when I put them on here, modulated music, can they handle the background? And what is that? Is that the dinner table? Is that family gathering? So what is the function? So, and what I said was you might be cleaning up the misperception, but they've lived with it for 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, 12 years. And so you might see glimmers, but what you have to have is, okay, now I can sort and filter. I'm starting to be able to, and so I can come to the family gathering for a minute or two, but then I start to lose it. But before I couldn't go at all. And so that you have to, as you're changing perception, you have to have positive experiences in the functions to really hold on to that perception. And I think that's one of the things that, people put, I put in this choice and nothing happened. Well, you're not looking in a refined way. That's one of the things that we see. And every time I get that question, I'm like, oh, I want to come into the clinic with you. I want to observe virtually in the house what you're seeing with these kids, because oftentimes there's these little glimmers and you have to really be nuanced sometimes to see them. And it's kind of mine and Tracy's mission to, really more Tracy's mission. Thank you, Tracy, and her brain's going to do this, to be able to get more of that written down. And what you're going to see, Tracy, I'm putting you on the spot, in the coming years is a manual that's a little bit more spelled out for therapeutic listening. Things that we've been saying, but we think aren't translating, because literally, how much can you hang on to in a 2-day training? So something that's going to be a little bit more substantial for people that will kind of help us out in our clinical reasoning.
So Tinsley has a great question. She has a client who's been using the modulated music for a year and now is thinking about incorporating the quick shifts. So how does she go about doing that? Can they listen to both quick shifts and modulated in the same day, or just transition to quick shifts? 1 to 2 times a day.
Tracy, I just need to plug in my computer. I see that it's not plugged into the
Yep,
wall.
I'll go ahead and start, and then you can add. So you can do either, actually. So the modulated music, you could have the client, if you still felt as though they were benefiting from the modulated music, you could have them listen to a modulated selection 1 time a day and the alternate selection be the quick shift 1 time a day. If you would like to do a little bit more cleanly understanding what the quick shifts give you, I might just have the client listen to the same quick shift 2 times a day and use that for 2 weeks, and then switch as you would with the modulated music and start to do a quick shift rotation. We have definitely done that with our clients, where we'll use the modulated music, or the quick shifts for that matter, for a period of time and then transition to the other selection. So I think either options are a great way to go.
I think that's comprehensive.
The next question Maria is asking about, she's working with a young lady who has a diagnosis of autism and is terrified of the ambulance and the fire truck, and she's done well with quick shifts, but this issue just doesn't seem to resolve based upon her sound sensitivities.
Yeah, I think she needs modulated music. So that, and she probably needs a longer course. And what we know about autism is that they are more reactive to sound, and that is the one thing, and that we know this from research that's been done, that they have, they're easier to startle and the latency is longer. And so that the processing in the brainstem and potentially having to do in that area of inferior colliculus, which is very tied up with vestibular, proprioceptive, auditory, somatosensory, where they're all being integrated at a low level, that there may be some potential issues with some of the climbing fibers also related to the cerebellum. So again, this is one of those things where it's going to take longer, and you're going to have to think about shifting perception over time and her having more positive experiences. So going into modulated music, and I'd be thinking links to space, based on, I'd like to know more about her vestibular postural function. Is she possibly a nature pop? Is it a links to space, links to modulation, rhythm and rhyme into Mozart might be another kind of progression I might be thinking about. Also, would she be a child where the spatially enhanced was an issue? So it may be helpful for you to fill out kind of a little bit more information at questions@vitalinks.net and send that in. We could help you clinically reason a little bit more around that, because I think she's going to need more than, and I'm glad the quick shifts have been helpful, but that really shows you how you need all of the libraries to choose from. We could help you kind of surf through that, because I need to ask you a lot more questions and that we don't really have time here. And so really go through her functional listening questionnaire, tell us as much as you can about her, and I can help you out with that through questions@vitalinks.net.
For individuals who have intrusive thoughts or dissociative disorders, are there any precautions or recommendations for therapeutic listening?
It has been super helpful. The only thing, and this is a kind of a precaution, kids dissociate for a reason, because it's too uncomfortable to be in the now. And so what the therapeutic listening, all elements, quick shifts and modulated, do is bring you to the now. So what you need to do is watch really, really carefully that client. I think quick shifts would be your best starting point. And just watch when they come into the now, keep them in the now through interaction. And if they look like they're getting agitated, and it might be because they have disconnected from their feelings because they're too big for them to handle. So, and when they get in touch, are they starting to get agitated again? Watch the breath, watch skin color, and you will know. It is rare that it becomes problematic. It's almost always helpful, but there is I'd say it's really a 1% of all the clients I've seen who that could get tricky. It's really what we know about trauma is that for things that can be helpful need to be titrated. They need to be metered out in small doses. So you're going to have to watch for the dose. That's why treating trauma takes in the elements and skills that we have, but it takes it to another level.
For Megan was asking about for individuals that you have been working with in a school-based setting, but now has to be a home-based setting due to the current restrictions. How do you begin incorporating therapeutic listening or the quick shifts?
Well, I don't know if you have potential for the family to purchase them, or if you have a library. That can be an issue that can be sticky with a school district. So it's going to depend on what you have available to you. So I don't know how to work that out. That's going to be individual for all school districts. Some of them have libraries and maybe tapping into that. But what I would do is have the family choose your best one. Potentially you might know that child and what has worked at school. I'd start there, but have the family download the app and start using them there. I don't know if you're asking that differently, or Tracy, you heard that question differently to add to that.
No, I think that the logistics are going to be the hardest part to manage, which will be dependent upon your school district, as you said, and if they have equipment and all of that. So that is a tricky piece.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I mean, then because it does, and this is the part that is just a sad reality, depend on socioeconomic. And especially, it's one of the things we need to be concerned about now with our families is, do they have the means? Some families are fine and they're still working and they have the means, and some families don't. So it is the unfortunate component, and I don't know if there's any potential funding in your school district, or there are people that have grant funding, or if you have a hard library that people can be able to lend out, at least in specific cases. So
Nancy has a great question about using quick shifts in specific situations, more as part of a sensory diet as opposed to the twice a day, like the modulated music, and how to use quick shifts in the moment. I know I'll say that one of our favorite ways to use the quick shifts and more matching it to a specific situation would be something like bedtime. I know Sheila had mentioned that piece, but the quick shifts before bed, especially the regulation 2, the regulation 1, are both tend to be really good choices to support sleep. Those tend to be classically favorite among therapists and clients alike for supporting that. Also thinking about matching a quick shift prior to maybe an academic activity. So if children are doing their homeschooling activities and they've done a period in the morning and they start to lose focus a little bit later in the day, but they're not quite done with their schoolwork, maybe taking a break and using something like a gentle focus quick shift while they play for a little bit and then return to school activities may be a potential way to use them. Go ahead, Sheila. I know you've got more to add.
no, I think that's really good. I wasn't thinking of anything, so
Okay.
I know
those are a couple things. The other piece too is just thinking about, for some of our kids, the access to movement may not be as possible right now. Their sports activities that they used to do. So even maybe using some of the rhythmical quick shifts maybe in the afternoon before, if they could go outside, or before doing any kind of obstacle course or something, to try to use the rhythms to support their need for movement through auditory, which is one thing they may be able to access easier than getting outside to move.
I did have a thought back to the sleep routine, Tracy, is I think when you use quick shifts, you want to use it with your whole bag of tricks. So one of the things that I would say is I'd create a bedtime routine that maybe had some rituals around it, and start maybe with in the parent's lap if that's age appropriate, but the parent reading a story, or maybe the parent sitting on the bed or in the room with an older child and just reviewing the day while the quick shift has started playing, so that you're supporting them in, or doing a foot massage. Might be a routine that you could establish, and then also just incorporate the quick shift into that. So you've done some other things that have been helpful to promote sleep. I would say doing some other OT activities. Those of you that have been on other webinars with us we use, or any of our workshops, we always use an activity melting, doing that on, if you have power-up balls, but also doing that on a gym ball, or maybe before the child gets in the bed or when they get in the bed, the family rolls a gym ball over top of them and gives them some deep pressure. And maybe that's not possible. Maybe it's done with the hands, and make a little bedtime routine.
It's a great suggestion. We'll just do a couple more questions because I know we're kind of getting to the end of our time. But Nancy was also asking as a follow-up question, can we use quick shifts to support recovery or regrouping from dysregulation? When at all possible, in an ideal world, right? We'd love to use the quick shift prior to that hard part of the day as kind of a prep to see if we can get you in a more regulated state. However, that being said, that's not always possible, and sometimes we do go over the edge and reach that state of dysregulation. And in particular, we found the Regulation 3 quick shift to be very supportive of moving into dysregulation and regrouping. We have kind of coined it the temper tantrum tamperer because it sometimes meets kids at that state of dysregulation and helps to calm them down. And you can use the quick shifts not only over headphones, circumoral, go around the ear headphones, but you can also play them over speakers in open air. Just be mindful of the space in which you are playing them in and not to have too many competing noises at the same time.
The other one that I'd think about is like if a child is really rendered a little bit more paralyzed by anxiety, where they're getting stuck on an idea and they really can't transition off of something, or they can't transition into something and they're just super wound up and anxious, then I would use a rhythmic raspberry quick shift. And that could avoid the eventual meltdown if the meltdown was started because of the anxiety of the transition into something that was terrifying, or they couldn't leave something they were sort of stuck on. That would be where that could be really helpful.
Lauren was saying that some of her kids don't seem to lose their auditory sensitivities or their startle. Do you have any suggestions in that instance?
Well, I think that in that case, you really need to work on the things that can improve relaxation in the body. So you may be using other elements of sound, but I would also be working a lot with movements that are oscillatory and just simply shaking, wiggling, a lot of work on the ground with resistance, because where the tension gets held in the startle, we might see it in the extremities, but it really gets held in the trunk, in the deep flexors. And so when you do things like activities where there's resisted rolling is like probably my favorite, or we could use rolling our bodies on a gym ball or a power-up ball on the wall, where you have to put pressure into your trunk and rotate around it to be able to accomplish the task. And now I probably could generate about 40 activities of that, but just to give you a few, I mean, couch cushions on the floor, and somebody is trying to roll and you're resisting them with a couch cushion and trying to stop them. So it's like a rolling challenge game where Tracy and I play gauntlet. So you could play gauntlet on the floor with couch cushions, bed cushions, and they have to get through the gauntlet by rolling. And that way, that will definitely release a lot of that tension that's held in the trunk. Because what's happened is you have years of built up tension, and that tension's built up, and now there's a story around it about sound, and you might have shifted the auditory perception, but you still have some of the old patterns left in the body.
Perfect. So are you aware, or Sheila, do you know off the top of your head the source for the research for the article you were talking about on autism and the startle and longer latency?
It's in auditory defense. It's from Japan. I think if you look at autism startle and it's because it's a name that is Japanese and I couldn't pronounce it in the first place to hang on to it. And I'm not a visual learner. So that's a little bit of a problem with my own issues. So, but it's in the auditory defensiveness slide. So I don't know if you can, I can't flip through my computer and find that right now, but we do have it.
Okay. Last question, and then I'm going to kind of wrap things up with a couple last questions that came in around things more administrative related. Is it counterproductive to skip tracks on the modulated album if the child has a negative reaction? For example, a 4-year-old who cries when they hear voices or talking on the tracks.
I don't think it's counterproductive if it's helpful for you, but I think it's a lot of work. I would probably just change the music. But that would be what I would do. But if you skip the tracks and you're fine with skipping the tracks, I'm fine with that because you've found the match and it's working for you. But I think that's a lot of work and I'd probably move to something else. And then I would use that information for clinical reasoning. So that voice is got a little bit more emotion in it, and emotion in the voice is a little bit challenging. Does the same thing happen on Peach? Is that voice different? It might also cause it, but it probably won't on Rhythm and Rhyme because that voice is more, the emotion's more about grabbing your attention. It doesn't have any affective, sad, or kind of tricky emotions in it. That'd be my thinking. And so, maybe I want to change back to Rhythm and Rhyme. Did I ever use Rhythm and Rhyme? Or do I just use more Mozart pieces because Mozart's music has the qualities of the voice and without as strong an affective piece? That would be my thinking. So you have lots of options. You have to really ask yourself those questions. Clinical reasoning is about really learning to ask a lot of questions and follow your, if it's this, I'll do this and then do it and then see if that was helpful, and then you gain more information. So you want to follow that thread.
Great, thank you, Sheila. Very, very helpful. A lot of really important questions. I'll wrap up with a question from Jennifer, who had asked about using the Therapeutic Listening app and wants to be able to move towards that for families, for telehealth and more virtual application. So in your materials with this course, in addition to the PowerPoint, you also received access to instructions for how to access the Therapeutic Listening app on an Apple product or an Android product. So it walks you through step by step. Those instructions are also available on the VitalLinks website in the support section. Essentially, the app itself serves as the player, and then you as the therapist or the family would then access whichever album you are interested in. The nice part about using the modulated music on the app is that it has a 2-week rental option, so that families can purchase the rental and use it for the 2 weeks in the traditional way that we use the modulated music and change albums every 2 weeks without that large upfront expense of having to buy the entire album. So that's a really nice application in this format. You can also purchase the quick shifts on the Therapeutic Listening app as well. So like I said, there are more instructions available to help you with that, and I'll stay on to continue to answer those kinds of questions if that's helpful, Jennifer. I also wanted to end by sharing some of our upcoming courses. I know some of you had asked if you have been trained in therapeutic listening before and you're interested in getting more updated. We do have an upcoming course this weekend. We do offer that discount, as Sheila mentioned, for therapists who have already been trained. If you are interested in that, please email me at info@vitallinks.net and I can help set up a custom coupon code for you to be able to use. Regardless, I'd like to thank you all and to thank Sheila for your participation and your engagement in today's webinar. We really appreciate your continued support for VitalLinks, but also for your clients. It's really clear that you are all amazing therapists and really want the best for your clients at this period in time. Please send me a message in the chat box if you do have any additional questions that relate to the therapeutic listening or any of our other upcoming courses. I'm happy to assist you and support you with that. Otherwise, thank you all so much. Thank you, Sheila. And I will be putting together the recording and sending it out to people who didn't get to see it. So just so you know that if you have colleagues who are also interested in this recording. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you to Sheila.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I just have to say she's my partner in play and seeking joy in the world, which we do through our work, and really an incredible supporter of all of the therapists. I'm not technically able at this point in my life to support you in the way, but Tracy works tirelessly behind the scenes to connect with you, always bringing anything that comes up back to me. And from that, we really are problem solving, because Vital Links was set up from the get-go to support therapists. And that's where my heart is. And without Tracy, I couldn't do it. So I am emotional today, but I really appreciate you, Tracy, and all of the work you do behind the scenes, and that you go the extra mile for the clinicians so that they can go the extra mile for their clients. So thanks so much, Tracy, and all of you for attending.
Thank you, Sheila. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. You are welcome to log out at this point. Like I said, if you do have any additional questions, I will stay on to help you with those. Take care.